and welcome to Round Robin. I'm your host, Robin McCormick, with the City of Hampton's Communications and Marketing Department. And today we're going to focus on a particular neighborhood in Hampton and its unusual history. And really, it's a story that hasn't been told. It's Garden City, and my guests today are Gaynell Drummond and Joe King. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good morning.
So I've met you a couple of times now. You had to come before the Planning Commission, and you came before the City Council to turn this house into a museum. And the story really captivated me because it's one I'm not at all familiar with, and I think most of the folks out there aren't familiar with. So first of all, let me just introduce you. And Gaynell, you said you have had a history in the History Museum and the library system, so you've lived and worked in Hampton pretty much your whole life.
Yes, Hampton is one of the cities that's close to my heart. I love Hampton. And I grew up here in Hampton, attended Hampton Institute at the time.
Right.
And all the Hampton City Public Schools, and went to college here. Lived away for a short while and returned home, and I got a job with the Hampton City Public Library, worked there for 25 years, and then I ended my career working at the Hampton History Museum, and I retired from the city at that time.
Okay, and Joe, you also grew up in Hampton.
Yes, I grew up in Hampton on Teach Street, and I went to high school here at Phoenix, and then went to Norfolk State. I was, involved in the community from the time I was just a kid.
Right.
I got a light for the corner on Jamestown Avenue. And Teach Street, Wythe Street at the time, and I talked to the mayor of the city, and he gave me a light on that corner.
So you have a history
of
being involved and being active.
I was about 12 years old then.
Okay.
Right? And then I went to Norfolk State on football scholarships and stuff, and track and stuff. And after that, I got drafted in the Army. And went through the Army, went into an area of organic chemistry in the Army, and taught that while I was in the Army, taught organic chemistry to the officers, and I was enlisted. Then I got a commission, and went on to spend 26 years in the military and retired, and been involved in the city in many things here on the school board for 4 or 5 years.
Oh.
And we had a lot of change during that time. Yeah. But anyway.
And you're a businessman now. What are some of your business interests?
I'm involved in 3 restaurants in Merchant Square in Williamsburg. Can I say the names?
Yeah, go right ahead. That's what you do.
The Trellis, the Blue Talon, and the Dog Street Pub.
Now we're going to have to get you running some restaurants in Hampton.
We're working on that.
Okay.
That's the truth. Okay. We're working on that.
So you guys then bring a wealth of experience to this project. And one of the things you have in common is you both grew up in Garden City. Now tell me where that neighborhood is, because literally it's one of the ones that we don't use the name now and that most people may not be familiar with.
Right. Well, Garden City was a neighborhood in Elizabeth City County when the city of Hampton.
It wasn't Hampton, of course.
Right. The larger part of Hampton was Elizabeth City County. Only downtown Hampton was called Hampton. That was the county seat.
Right.
In 1950, the city incorporated all of the county, and so the whole area became the city of Hampton. Garden City's legal boundaries are Shell Road over to Pembroke and Maryland Avenue over to T Street. However, Garden City was such a well-known area. People who lived anywhere in the vicinity used to say, well, I live in Garden City. And in fact, when I was a young child, my mother used to get mail addressed to her, Garden City, Virginia.
Oh, wow. That is well known.
Yeah.
Now, you were talking about when you grew up there, the neighborhood, I was comparing it maybe to Aberdeen Gardens, because that is another garden neighborhood that was traditionally African American. But Garden City predates that by
Aberdeen.
35, 40 years,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So how did that neighborhood come about? That's, you know, pretty unusual right there at the turn of the century.
Yeah, a little bit more logistics there.
Okay.
Garden City is in planning area, District 9, and it runs just about parallel to Old Wythe. So it's considered part of Greater Wythe.
Right, okay.
And,
so it's kind of along that Pocahontas-Powhatan corridor,
Yes.
just on the other side of Kickingham.
Powhatan is the dominant street because that's where the traffic flows through. So I think if most people will know what
know
Powhatan
that.
is, and we're on the next corner, you know, on Pocahontas.
Okay.
And those, of course, are you know, Native American names.
Yeah. Now, the other thing about Garden City, the Garden City movement is a planning concept that was conceived by Ebenezer Howard, who was a British urban planner in the early 19th century. In the mid 1800s, he came up with this idea that communities should be laid out in a concentric pattern. And he came up with the thought of Garden City. And he sold that planning concept all over America and parts of Europe. And that's why you have Garden City, New York, and Garden City, New Jersey. There are garden cities all over America, actually.
It was, in some ways, kind of what they call the new urbanism now, where you build out these planned neighborhoods, and it's a little bit of a live, work, play.
And fortunately,
Of course, then I think growing your own food was
Yes.
a much more important concept.
yes.
Although people are getting back to that today.
I've got a history of that also. I've been gardening so long, I do not remember learning to garden. That's how, I was just a kid. And now, for the last 40 years, 50 years, I've been, you know, gardening organically. And back when it wasn't even, nobody knew what it was or why you did it or whatever.
Right.
And, but I was doing it. Having been a chemist, organic chemist, I, you know, understand what we were doing to the earth. And I understood that. And so, having, you know, understanding that, then I certainly should try to do something about it, and that's what I've done. So that's going to work well with us in Garden City, because now we're doing, you know, the raised beds with the, you know, flowers and with the vegetables intermingled and et cetera. So it all is going to work together.
That's so cool. So let me just get back to, so this neighborhood, it was a national concept, and someone developed it in Hampton.
Yes.
And that was around, you said 1913. Okay.
Garden City was actually, I guess the plan was brought into it, and it was decided by the city or the county to buy the plan and to develop a Garden City. And in the Garden City concept by Ebenezer Howard, and I like to say he's the granddaddy of the city planning profession, you would have a large garden city in the middle with lots of smaller satellite garden cities around. And thereby we have other communities like Dunbar Gardens, Aberdeen Gardens, Little Farms, what are some of the other ones? Rosalie Gardens. And there's several communities with a kind of a flower or park, or there's LaSalle Acres, a gardening type theme in its neighborhood name. And the thought is by Ebenezer Howard that people should be able to live close to where they work, because people didn't have a lot of cars. There was not a lot of public transportation, and there weren't a lot of grocery stores. That was somewhat of a new kind of a concept of grocery store. So the land was developed with a home and enough land to garden, and maybe some little businesses close by, somewhat like the town center concept that we have now.
Right. There's almost a full circle return.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So you both grew up there, and well, first of all, let's go back into the history. So this neighborhood gets built, and it's a little bit unusual for it to be for people of color in 1912. It was a very nice neighborhood. How did that happen?
She knows.
Well, the community was an extension of the old Wythe community. And as developers do, they build the large fancy houses on the front end of the neighborhood, and then as the neighborhood gets deeper, and we're moving back up into the woodland now area.
Oh, right, I bet it was woods then.
because all along Pembroke was heavily wooded.
Chickataway Indians.
When we grew up. And so the houses got a little bit more affordable and more humble. And this was the era of Jim Crow and segregation. As the houses got more humble and unaffordable, the white community did not want to buy those houses. And the developer was forced to sell the houses to someone, so it was offered to people of color that could afford them.
Right. So that was probably a fairly small audience at that time.
Yes.
Right.
And you guys, getting back to the Native American and the street names, mentioned that both of you have Native American history and that was prevalent in that neighborhood at the time.
Very prevalent. I don't know what the percentages were, but very prevalent. But then, one of the strong things that happened in that community, because we were so close, is that I was sort of like an apprentice to two very successful people, and as my uncle was, basically Native American, and that has, right now I'm, the owner of a salvage business, and as I said, restaurants and so forth. And I got that straight from, because at the time I couldn't get a job as a chemist.
Right. Oh gosh, I didn't even think of that.
I tried to get a job here in Amoco, because I did fuel from the catalytic cracker right on through. I can do all of that. And they told me I was too qualified.
Wow.
And that.
So you were always interested in chemistry, you just couldn't really get into the field until you were in the Army.
Right. Well, that's the only way, it afforded you an opportunity to have that diversity, where you're going to go as that kind of chemist here, I was not a great student or anything. I just enjoyed chemistry and understood chemistry. And a lot, I knew that I was going to be in business. I knew that I was going to run business.
But that goes to say that there are many stories to be told from all of the different families that lived in Garden City. There were many businesses. It was strong in black businesses. We had our own grocery stores. We had to be a self-sufficient community. And we had a shoe repair shop and dry cleaners and all kinds of little pubs and inns. And so there were a lot of business people that developed their businesses in Garden City. And actually in Garden City, there was an arena that preceded the Hampton Coliseum. It was called the Sports Arena. And it was an arena that Mr. King probably can tell you more about than myself, because at the time they said that nice girls did not go to the sports arena. But we had B.B. King and Bobby Womack, Ray Charles, James Brown, Ike and Tina Turner, the whole list of black entertainment during that long period of time would come to Garden City, and that's one thing that made Garden City so well known. Yet and still, because of the era of segregation, there were not restaurants and hotels and places where these entertainers and people could go afterwards. Mm-hmm. So they frequented certain homes in the community.
And the Drummond home was one.
Really? Now, see, Ruth Brown used to tell those stories. She came back to Portsmouth and Hampton in her later years.
Yep.
Right. And she
Same
would
time.
tell those stories of playing in Hampton, and I believe she called it the Chitlin Circuit.
Chitlin Circuit,
and,
right.
what that was like, where sometimes it wasn't even an arena, but people would come to a barn or and gather.
A little. We had several little community places that would.
Yeah, you would go and you would sing or whatever. I was in a group.
And see, I always wondered where was it in Hampton that that
we
Ruth
had them
Brown
in
is
Garden
describing?
City,
and it was probably Garden City at least
Garden
some of those
City
times.
And I sung in a group.
Yeah.
And all of us were members of the choir, and all of us were very, very good, tenors and bass and baritones and so forth. But I chose, rather than going to that on the Chitlin circuit, which we have been on. We've been to New York and Maryland. And
you have really a varied array of history here.
Absolutely. We sung not everyone, but most people in my group in my time, they could play an instrument, sing or something. Drums, trumpet, never had a lesson in their lives.
They just learned from the community.
And the saxophones and everything. Piano, yeah.
So this is a fascinating tale. And you guys, though, have this huge task now. You've bought the house.
Yes.
Right.
And it's a 100-year-old house. I'm going to guess it might need a little work.
Oh, lots of work.
I have a 50-year-old house and it needs a little work.
No, we don't know whether it's going to be up or down, whether we're going to have to redo it or what, but we'll see.
So you've got a nonprofit corporation that you formed.
Yes.
How do you begin this task of collecting these stories from the past 100 years and preserving the house and rebuilding the gardens? I mean, what's your business plan?
Now, the major thing you mentioned was rebuilding the gardens. This area, Elizabeth City County and City of Hampton, had 4 Federated Negro Garden Clubs of Virginia. Just like you have the Historic Garden Week that travels all of the big, wonderful houses throughout the state of Virginia in the spring, there was a Negro Garden Club of Virginia that paralleled that. And they were state federated and the yards were state judged. And the site of our organization at 1911 Shell Road was one of those showcase gardens. And the yard was absolutely beautiful. In fact, there were several really beautiful yards in the Garden City community. And what we want to do is to become that beautiful corner edifice again and beautiful landscape yard to help to lift the vision of the community. The community is in social decline right now.
Well, and I think that's fair to say, because if you hear Shell Road on the news, it's almost always in connection with some sort of crime.
Yes.
And it isn't in connection with a historical museum and living gardens.
I think you wanted to know, the question you asked was about the business plan.
Right.
Okay, and how we're going to do that. What we're going to do, of course, is we're going to look for grants. We're going to look for making this sort of a test area to solve those problems that you're talking about. The crime and et cetera, et cetera. That's where we need to come in. And in the years I've been involved in this community, I have seen it, just deteriorate.
Oh, I can imagine. It doesn't look at all like it did in your childhood.
One of the things that we're going to do is I've got people who are very, very, you say business plan, they're very, well versed on the psychology of communities and so forth, doctors and several people who have PhDs and so forth. I'm not going to be the one that's going to do that heavy lifting. That's going to be, especially to people in the colleges here. They can use this as getting a doctorate degree or whatever. And what we're going to do is we're going to raise the money. That is something that I've never had a problem with. I think that, money is not our problem. We need good ideas. We need good ideas. We need things that will work. And so we'll get the money. So, and we're at that point now with what the city gave us to allow us to
you got a
work.
Zoning variance that allowed you to be a museum
that allows
and to have
us
certain
to do
public hours.
Yeah, right. We didn't want to do anything or collect any money until we were ready to go, and now we're ready to go.
And that was the interesting point too, because although I just heard of it, you guys have been doing this work now for a couple of years, really.
Almost 5 years.
5 years to buy the house and make the plans and
the house,
and it's not going to be the two of you, right? Do you have a board? Do you have some other folks?
We're doing all of that.
We need anyone who has a love of history and an interest, especially in gardening. The community is a historic gardening community, and we think that is so special for the city of Hampton to have a historic gardening community and to restore that community's beauty There's gardening, tourism, and agritourism is a big trend now.
That's big. And African American history and tourism
Yes.
is one of Hampton's big
Yeah.
draws. You know,
Yes.
you tie that in with people that are coming to
Yes.
HU and the Emancipation Oak and Fort Monroe for
Yes.
its role in
The
history.
true African American and Native American history is brand new, so to speak, because
yeah.
it's never been told.
Especially in Virginia. We have not done a good job with our Native American history at all.
And
You know,
the history in Garden City is so rich and so thorough. It's such a great asset for the city of Hampton. It would be remiss to miss this opportunity at this day and time not to tell the story. We also have a Rosenwald School that's located in the community. Rosenwald schools are known
Now,
as...
is that still standing?
Well,
Or-
it's the site of the
it's been-
Hampton Boys and Girls Club.
Right, it's
okay.
It's in the same footprint.
It's been altered to some
But
extent.
the building is a different building. But we want to reclaim that as a area of beauty and activities for youth and opportunities for the community as well.
We're going to do a whole lot, you know, with the youth and whatnot in the community, because I believe that the biggest problem we have in America in the many years I've been here is that, and the experience that I have is we need functional families.
Well-
And we don't have those as we should. The number is not where it should be.
Right, and if you don't have a functional family, you can at least have that community that
Yes.
brings those youth along. And that gets
Yes.
back to
And we're gonna bring-
you and your uncle and how you were pulled into learning
I listened to
and
my
being
elders.
prepared. Right.
A
So you guys
Native
are gonna
American
work
type
on-
thing. You listen to your elders, and very few people did. You know, they didn't do that, and so consequently they paid. And I would only listen to. I had sense enough to listen to those people who were successful.
And that has paid off well for you.
Very well.
Okay.
I am very pleased.
I don't want to cut you off, but we do need to wrap up for today.
Okay.
And we're going to put up some information, I hope, on how people who want to make a donation or volunteer time or
you.
ideas can contact you. So
Yes.
we'll make sure we give people that information. And I want to ask if you guys will come back at some point and start talking about these success stories and what
Updates.
you've done in
Update.
that neighborhood and give us some updates, because
Right.
that would be
We will do
wonderful.
it.
Well, thank you, Joe, and thank you, Gaynelle, for coming by today. And thank you for watching this episode of Round Robin. I hope you've learned a little piece of Hampton's history, or Elizabeth City County's history, that you didn't know as well.